if behavior isn't gender, like if all these things that we associate with gender aren't gender, then what makes me a man and not a woman?
Welcome to Transparency Talk, a channel for trans people to tell their stories, share their successes, and inspire others with some much needed good news, especially in the current political environment. I'm your host, Ember, a 44-year-old woman of transgender experience. If you want more trans-positive content like this, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Welcome to Transparency Talk. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Ben Hamilton, a veteran, a physician, and a passionate advocate for critical thinking, evidence-based medicine, and scientific literacy. He hosts Medical Myths, co-hosts the Transatlantic Call-In Show and Talk Heathen, and frequently appears on the Transpositions Weekly, among many other places. Dr. Ben delves into topics ranging from debunking medical misinformation to addressing ethical questions in healthcare and exploring the latest scientific discoveries. But today, he's here to talk about a subject deeply personal, himself. Dr. Ben, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, glad to be here. I know a lot of these more personal episodes can be really, really good quality episodes because it's you get to see a side of people that you don't normally get to, and especially with more of the trans related shows, there's a lot of backstory that you wouldn't think about with a lot of people.
Oh, for sure. Backstory is a great way to slide into our conversation here. One of the bigger problems that trans people have is coming to terms with themselves. How has your self-acceptance evolved over time? Like, where did it start and where are you now?
Yeah, it was a history. As I grew up evangelical, and it took me a long time to even know what being queer was. Like, I didn't know gay people were a thing until I heard they were bad in middle school, and I was like, okay, well, that's scary. And I even remember like getting in a argument with somebody at band camp of all places because I was like, no, gay people are icky, I don't like them. They were just talking about gay people like they're regular people, and then I left that conversation. I was like, I really had no argument to stand on with that conversation. Like, that was a really dumb perspective. And then kind of looking back on it, yeah, it absolutely was a really dumb perspective because I was just talking from my own bias and my own problems I had with people I had never met before. And slowly over time, I I was getting like more and more kind of sucked in by religion, but it wasn't because I necessarily liked what was going on, but it was the same fear that a lot of people have and why they dig further into religion is fear of what's going to happen, fear of losing community, all that stuff. I still like held on to belief, but kind of as things went, two sides of me were kind of competing. There's the one side that was like we have to do all the right things the way that I was taught, and the other side that was finding out that the rules didn't make sense with the people I met and the world that I lived in. And I was like I got 2 years of a theater degree, which does not help with any of that because you meet lots and lots of queer people. I didn't know any trans people. Well, actually that's not true. I did I did know of one person that I had gone to grade school with forever, who had ended up transitioning like while I was kind of in early undergrad. And I remember kind of weird, confused feelings that I couldn't really point to. But looking back, a lot of the feelings were, I wish that were me. Like, I wish I could be the kind of person that could get testosterone and live like a guy. Um, but I never thought it was possible because I was always told, no, that's not you. You don't get to be a man. Only certain special people get to be a man. But I saw somebody else kind of doing the things that I wanted to do. And kind of as things went, I ended up switching from a theater major to biology and learned that a lot of other things that I grew up with were incorrect. And kind of things kept going, and I accepted evolution, and I I
It's a good
accepted
start.
that gay people were just people and that we didn't need to be afraid of them. And like as you just get familiar with other people, a lot of that stuff either you bury your head in the sand or kind of that indoctrination kind of starts falling away. And that was definitely the case for me. And I remember um I had a couple kind of like relationships with guys that I was intending to be more romantic relationships because you're supposed to have romantic relationships with the opposite sex, and they were really good friendships. Like I really enjoyed them as friends, but I thought that women were supposed to be miserable in relationships, and so I was like, okay, there's nothing out of the ordinary here because you're taught that your say doesn't matter. Um, but I just like was not physically attracted to any of them. It's like and one of them like was probably the perfect person if I were to be attracted to men at that time, that would have been the perfect person. And I was like, I'm not interested in this person. Like I can sit on the couch with you and watch movies, but like I don't want to go any further than that. Like it just doesn't feel right to me.
Yeah.
And then I had a lot of questions. I was like, why am I not why is it that no matter what I do, I can't have this kind of relationship? But then I look back at the way that I've thought about women, and that's been very different. Like the things that people had thought, like when they've described relationships or described having attraction to somebody, that's the way I always felt about women. And I was like, but hold on, I I'm not supposed to have those feelings, but they were the same feelings. Like it took me a long time to categorize that as attraction because
Yeah.
I just didn't think it's possible to have attraction to the same sex. So, um, but it made sense, and I started exploring a little bit of my sexuality, and like, okay, this is fine. I'm happy, like being gay. Um, and then things kept going on, and of course, like that solved like some of the problems, but it didn't address everything. And I didn't actually start like really questioning my gender identity until my first year of med school. So like I already come out as gay. I had already come out as an atheist. It's funny because you look back and you wonder, I think all of us do, where you wonder, how did it take me so long when all of the evidence was there? Like, it doesn't make
Hindsight.
sense to me now, but it took me until then to even question. And then the journey to coming out as trans and then taking the steps to socially and medically transition was tougher than anything else because I think, especially with the media coverage of what people think it means to be trans, it's scary. It's a scary thing to come to terms with. To think like I'd always accepted like once I realized it was a thing, I'd accepted that trans people existed, but you always think, no, it can't be me. No, it can't be. Like that's somebody else's problem. I don't need any more problems. And then you think about it more and you're like, I don't want this to be my problem. Don't, don't like I'm just gonna pretend this doesn't exist. And then the more and more you think about it, like, okay, no, this is my problem. this is this is real. I have to deal with this now. And then what am I gonna do about it for one? And what's going to happen to me because of it? And I think that's the big one of the biggest questions everybody asks is what is going to happen to me if I do transition? And because you don't know, and there's so much violence, so much hatred, and you don't know when you could be in an environment that is unsafe like that. And so I think that was the biggest hurdle for me to like overcome, in addition to the hurdle of what does it even mean to be any gender? Like if expression isn't gender, and like if behavior isn't gender, like if all these things that we associate with gender aren't gender, then what makes me a man and not a woman? And like that was something that I had to wrestle with for a long time. Um and so I inched closer and closer to like I first identified as like non-binary because I was like I don't know what I am. And then the more and more I creep towards man, like I think the whole time I knew that was the right answer. I just wasn't ready to accept that that was the answer because it seemed like such a big step.
Mm-hmm.
But no, it was exactly the right move. And I mean, everything that I did in my transition initially was set up for me to just say, hey, wherever I fall on the spectrum, it's going to be okay.
For almost all of us, it's a kind of convoluted process of going through the steps, like where do I actually fall? What do these feelings mean? All this sort of stuff. But coming from, an extremely repressed background where you didn't even know about evolution growing up. Holy
Yeah.
crap. Are you like just not unhappy now, or are you happy, if that makes sense?
I'm like separating all that out from the shit that people do to you because of like being trans. I'm very happy.
I definitely relate. I've had a number of experiences recently that have been rather sad making, but that's because of other people.
Mhm.
With myself, I'm happier than I can ever remember being. It's it's fucking magical. For you, what has been the most rewarding part of your journey? It's more than a journey because it's like not just a
Mhm.
medical process. It's that whole process of self-acceptance. It's navigating society. I hate using the term journey, but I don't have a better one.
Yeah, it's something so simple, but it's the heart of what it means to transition. It's just the ability to live like in a body that I feel is mine, and to feel like I can just exist in the world without having to like portray somebody I'm not. Like that's it. Like that's the best part. And people think that like transition is this big scary process, and there are a lot of scary things about it, but it's like that's the end goal. It's just existing as you, and that's it. I remember there were times like pre-transition where I would just be so confused. Like I'd have an existential crisis looking at myself in the mirror, and I'm like, I don't really know this person. And like it was a person I was living as for my entire life, but I would just be
Yeah.
like, I don't accept that that person is the same person that like I exist as every day. Like it just didn't click for some reason. And then I don't have those feelings anymore. Like, no, this isn't the ideal body I would have if I was like assigned male at birth, but like I recognize the person that I see. Like, okay, that's the person that I'm living as. It's the same person that I see in the mirror every day. That's an experience I feel like a lot of cis people don't really understand, like that confusion that you don't know where it's coming from. Like, I just don't recognize this person.
You mentioned that you were a couple years into a theater degree. I
Mhm,
didn't ever do a degree, but I did do a whole lot of theater when I was younger, and I kind of relate the experience to being an actor in a play.
mhm,
In fact, one of the reasons I loved theater so much was because it was the one time I could take the social mask off. And even though I was playing a
Mhm.
character, I was more myself.
Yeah, and actually, if I had transitioned earlier, I might not have ever left theater. If I was able to be cast as male at that time, I might not have left theater, and I might not be where I am today.
What was it that turned you more towards the medical path?
I think I was always curious about it. I always liked it. But growing up in the arts, I never thought that I'd be good at it. I was told I wouldn't be because there's that false dichotomy that if you're in the arts, you're not smart, which is not true.
Hmm.
And in fact, you have to be a successful artist, you need to be very smart, because you have to know number one, the skill of the art that you're doing, but also how to make it appeal to the public. And that's very difficult to do well. Um, but I just thought I could never do it. And and that was something also related to my upbringing in religion, where I thought that you were given like talents by God and you had to do those things because you are wasting yourself if you didn't. And so I thought, well, I was raised in the theater. Like I know I can do this thing. I should just stick with that. And I don't think I'm good at these other things, which it turned out I just didn't care about these other things at the time because I thought I sucked at it. And so one day in college, I was like, I don't like what I'm doing. I want to do this other thing. And it's not that these other people have some like God-given destiny. They just chose a thing and they went for it. I'm like, I could also choose a thing and go for it. Like, there's nothing different about us as people other than they chose this thing and I didn't. So I'll choose it. And so I did. And I've been unstoppable ever since then. It's
Fuck
just
yeah.
that momentum of like once you learn that like life is what you make it. There wasn't anything supernatural like keeping me from doing those things.
Have people in your life been broadly supportive? Of course, there's different groups. There's going to be family, friends, work, but overall, how do you perceive things?
Yeah, family, my immediate family, not so much. I have boundaries set up with them and w- yeah, we have boundaries set up. But with my more extended family, they're really cool about it. Um, my chosen family, so like the YouTube and Twitch communities, and my work community, like they're all super cool about it. Like I rarely feel like I'm not supported, um, as a trans person, which is pretty incredible. But also, I also just like don't feel bad about removing myself from places that are shitty to me. So
Fair. And that's a hard thing for a lot of people to learn. Who would you say has been your biggest ally or supporter, and how have they influenced your life positively?
so when I was first beginning like coming out and beginning my social transition, um, I was part of a really tight knit like jujitsu community, and specifically it was on the women's team, like a women's jujitsu community within my academy. And it was very scary initially coming out because I was wondering, was I going to lose that community? The answer is no. And like they were some of the most supportive people. And in fact, my chosen name, so my full name, Torben, comes from a nickname that one of my jujitsu coaches actually like is a nickname that was given to me just out of the blue. And then later on I ended up deciding to take that as my chosen name. Um, but they made it so much of like not a big deal at all that it was great. It's just like I'm still the same person, and they're just gonna call me by a different name, use different pronouns, and like that was that. And it was just like the sometimes the ideal allies are not making a big deal out of it or not really doing anything different. Sometimes they're just letting you exist. They're like, oh, this is the same person that we've known this whole time. Cool.
If it were completely up to you, what role would you like to play in empowering others within and beyond the trans community?
Number one, kind of like a more medical resource of a place where people could like ask questions about the specific guidelines. Especially when we get to conversations about puberty blockers or HRT and things like that, people are so misinformed. I think like the niche that I've kind of found myself like fitting into is the like pseudoscience debunking area, and I think that's the perfect place for me. And I think it's a niche that not a lot of people can fit into, and so I've kind of happily accepted that spot. I know I kind of got into the call-in show sphere initially because of COVID, and I'm not mad about it. Like I capitalized on an opportunity. I was like, I know a lot of these shows aren't talking about COVID because they don't have somebody they feel can answer the questions, and so I slid in and was like, "Hey, um, I can take these calls for you." And so I like kind of got in the space with COVID, abortion, and trans issues, and that's kind of where I've sat.
What accomplishment do you feel most proud of since coming out?
For a while, I assumed that because I was the one trans person in the room most of the time, that I should take the role of advocacy and like making trans rights a thing that I focus my time and energy on. And that's not to say I won't do that. Like I do that in my free time. Like the call-in shows are in my free time. But I think one of my biggest accomplishments, I think, is separating those spheres out and being able to keep the activism, but also maintain like the life that I need to have for myself. Like I like my trans activism in more of the rhetorical space, in more of the misinformation debunking space, and less so having that as a daily clinical experience because it drains you and you're like, if you have to constantly fight for your own rights at home and fight for your patients' rights at the clinic and then do more advocacy the political and rhetorical sphere, that's a lot. It's draining.
It can be really hard because the very nature of coming out means you have to tell a bunch of people. I mean, you don't have to, but if you want to keep those people in your life, you probably should. And that kind of sets you up for being a public, open trans person. And not
Mhm.
everybody can do that because if you're being a public trans person all the time, at what point do you get to be just a person, which is the
Mhm.
entire point of the transition?
Right.
You mentioned that there's a lot of intersectional advocacy. Like sometimes
Mhm.
it's trans stuff, sometimes it's medical stuff, sometimes it's both. Can you think of a success story where you helped another person through advocacy?
Yeah. There are lots of examples, but I think some of the most powerful interactions are with parents. And even I even had an example of this in the clinic setting, but it was about like the social advocacy and less so about like giving somebody a medication. I did have a 17-year-old who was like basically gonna wait until his 18th birthday to get hormones, because his parents weren't quite on board yet. Um, and I was seeing him for like something a little bit different, but I noticed that he like was trans, and I think one of the nurses was telling me beforehand. I was like, no, I got this. Don't worry about it. And just having a conversation with two trans people in the room and the mom sitting there. I didn't say anything specific about how she should change anything or like what timeline to start hormones. Like I didn't give any recommendations about medical transition. All I did, like I asked questions about like this adolescent's particular goals, like kind of how they see things going, and then like talked them through like any questions that they had and that kind of thing. So I gave really no recommendations at all for that standpoint. But I had a phone call with that individual a bit later to go over some results, and he had just like out of the blue told me, "Oh yeah, my mom actually changed her mind," and it was something I never expected to have an influence in that way. But it was just I think people when you have a kid that's going through this, it's hard to see the whole community past that one person. And I think just having like an older trans person who was successful and like just living a normal life, like, okay, no, this is just people being people. And I think that just that like social interaction changed the perspective of that parent. Like once parents are on their side, like nothing is going to stop them. Like they have an ally for life, and like people should not underestimate the power of parental allyship because they like at least good parents, like they will fight hard for their kids.
Just meeting you must dispel a bunch of stereotypes. Like I've heard so many people say, "Oh, if my kid is trans, they're gonna grow up and be homeless, or this or that or whatever." And here you are, an actual doctor,
Mhm.
and just being a person, you know.
Yeah, and
So
it's
yeah,
surprising. There's so many trans doctors. In fact, Twitter is a shit show, but a bunch of the medical community is on there, and I've met so many other trans physicians through Twitter. Like, there's so many of us, it is unreal.
what does happiness look like for you today compared to before you embraced your identity?
Ooh, that's a good question. Not really having to worry about like what other people think and not worry about like is this going to affect my livelihood? Is this going to affect like a number of different things? Like my standards for what makes me happy have gone down. It's like if I'm safe, secure, and if I have people around me that are supportive, um, I'm pretty happy. And if I get to do the things that I love, then I'm happy. I think my standards for happiness were all based on success, and I put my value on success. And I think I just give less of a shit now. Because I feel like I don't have to prove myself. I just like because I don't have to prove that I'm a good or godly woman because I'm not. Like I know I'm not that thing. Why should I try to do that? And like same with everything else. Like I don't have interest in this thing. Why would I kill myself to be good at that thing? Like I'm not interested. Like when you're so on edge all the time because you can't be the person that you are, like everything else seems so much worse because like the one thing that I should have security in, like which is my identity, you don't even have that. And so you have nothing really to ground everything else in. You're like, what else do I make my identity? Because you feel like you can't just have the identity that you have. Now that I have security in what my identity is, everything else can change and it doesn't really matter. So I think that's what happiness is now.
Dr. Ben, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your story. If people want to follow your ongoing journey or your other adventures online, where can they find you?
So many links, like we talked about before we started recording. So I have a YouTube channel, which I changed everything to be like just my name as best as possible because then I don't have to continually change it for whatever titles change. So Dr. Ben Hamilton on YouTube. And then on Twitch, I changed it to Dr. underscore Ben H because any more reasonable way to spell it was already taken.
Fair.
So there's that on Twitch. On Twitter, it's Dr. Kidney Beans because that's the one I didn't change. But you'll see my name like in the name. And those are kind of the big places you can find me. And of course, Talk Heathen, the Transatlantic Call-In show, and then on the Transpositions whenever these people feel like inviting me, which is a couple of times now.
Oh yeah, you're always welcome to drop in if you feel like it.
Just show up. Like I live here now.
That's right. We love having you there. It's fantastic. Thank you all so much for watching. Positive reflections in our community are so important right now, so please do subscribe and consider sharing this video on all the socials to help get the word out about what we're doing here. If you'd like to support this show, a link to our Ko-Fi is in the description. If you'd like to share your story, you can email the show at transparencytalkshow@gmail.com. Until next time, stay positive.